Ba-dunt, ba-dunt, dun 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 dun. Jaws did nothing wrong. Hello there guys, and welcome back to another installment of Trey, the Explainer.
Jaws. See it before you go swimming.
Ah yes, the 1975 horror thriller Jaws is perhaps one of the most popular and significant movies in, well, the history of film itself, widely considered to be one of the best out there. I bet people who haven't even seen the movie generally know what it's about, as it's been lampooned, satirized, and referenced by virtually everything in pop culture. And this is not without good reason. Steven Spielberg's film, which follows a small New England resort town's fight against a ravenous monster-sized white shark terrorizing beachgoers, is a masterpiece and a personal favorite of mine. I love the griminess of the orca, the expertly well-acted and well-written characters and dialogue, the dramatic and suspenseful music by John Williams, the drawn-out fight against the mostly unseen shark as the world sinks around our heroes. I've watched the original countless times, and in preparation for this video I've watched all 3 of its sequels, and read the original novel, which the movie was based off of. I even think I'm such a Jaws nerd that one of the first videos I ever watched on YouTube was this amazing Lego stop-motion parody of Jaws, made all the way back in 2007, and is freaking adorable.
No, they don't have any evidence.
Jaws works great as a film, and nothing can draw away from that. All that being said, I am a cynical old scientist man now, and after talking to and interviewing a bunch of shark and fish experts, scientists, and conservationists, we must acknowledge the elephant, or should I say the elephant seal, in the room. Jaws wasn't the bad guy, and the film and how it portrays sharks has had real-world negative impacts on how we, as humans, treat these animals and the health of the oceans in general, revealing deeper, systematic problems with the decline of Earth's marine ecosystems over the past century. But I know this is a lot, and I'm getting ahead of myself. All this must sound kind of tinfoily, so allow me to present my evidence for these claims. So please sit back and get ready to learn about Jaws and the silent plight of how sharks aren't the real bad guys. It seems most fitting to start at the beginning. How exactly did we get a film like Jaws? The story behind Jaws. American author Peter Benchley had long since possessed a fascination with sharks. I remember seeing them swimming around in the water during fishing trips with his father off the coast of Nantucket. He originally got the idea for his novel after reading a 1964 news story about a fisherman harpooning and catching a 4,550-pound great white shark off the shore of Montauk Point, Long Island, New York. This fisherman was later identified as a Long Islander Frank Mundus. He became notoriously well known for his exploits and questionable fishing practices, namely using orca meat as chum and harpooning. Frank made a career out of what he called monster fishing, where he hunted and fished for large predatory sharks, namely white sharks, which would earn him the nickname Monster Man. Although Peter Benchley has denied it, Frank Mundus served as the primary inspiration for the character of Quint, the eccentric Ahab-esque captain of the orca in his upcoming novel. Benchley would be further inspired by accounts of a string of shark attacks occurring back in 1916 off the Jersey Shore, when a supposed rogue shark killed 4 people and left 1 critically injured, sparking a large shark hunt to find the culprit. Marine photographer Peter Gimbel's 1971 documentary, Blue Sea, White Death, provided much of Peter's knowledge on shark behavior, diving, and marine biology. Gimbel appears to be a large influence on the character of Matthew Hooper, the hotshot ichthyologist hell-bent on photographing and studying the large great white. Other notable influences were Herman Melville's Moby Dick, and likely numerous other big catch stories that often circulated in local newspapers from coastal fishing villages around the world. Benchley wanted to explore the idea of a story about a shark that attacks people, and what would happen if it came in and wouldn't go away. The resulting novel, published in 1974, would be given the simplistic title Jaws, and would be met with great commercial success. Hollywood film producers had a chance to read the book prior to its publication, and apparently thought it was so impressive that they bought the film rights and signed Steven Spielberg to direct an adaptation. Set in the fictitious Long Island resort town of Amity Island, the book and subsequent film followed the plot of a giant white shark.
That's a 20-footer. 25.
Referred to simply as the Great Fish, or nickname behind the scenes in the film adaptation, Bruce, hunting and attacking various inhabitants of Amity, and the actions, or lack of actions, characters in this town undertook to deal with the threat. The local government of the island, notably the mayor, wants to cover up the string of attacks, as making them public would not be beneficial for the town's tourism market. Several local and unprofessional fishermen are tasked with finding the suspected shark. A large tiger shark is caught, killed, and falsely claimed to be the culprit. As the attacks continue, it becomes clear that Bruce is very much alive, and it is finally agreed that a professional fisherman by the name of Quint will be hired to kill the shark with the help of a local police chief, Brody, and a marine biologist, Hooper. Bruce puts up a formidable multi-day-long fight in the open ocean, killing Quint and destroying his fishing vessel. Brody manages to kill the animal with a well-placed shot from a rifle, finally saving Amity.
You know the thing about a shark? He's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes.
Jaws' success, both as a book and as a film, created a public discourse and consciousness about sharks in general. Bruce, as described and portrayed in the film, is a bloodthirsty monster, along the lines of the xenomorph from Alien, or Jason or Michael Myers from the Friday the 13th and Halloween franchises respectively. The 1975 trailer for the film describes the shark as acting
Without passion and without logic. It is as if God created the devil and gave him jaws. None of man's fantasies of evil can compare with the reality of Jaws.
The novel even writes a few scenes from the shark's perspective, and it becomes obvious that this creature is driven purely by hunger and instinct, thinking of nothing but blood and meat. His brain is small and primitive, and is described much like a mechanical machine, only responding to a set number of feedback responses. Sharks, according to the fictional fish expert character Matthew Hooper, are
a perfect engine, an eating machine.
And the only good thing about great whites is that they're scarce. Sharks are like axe murderers, says the character of Harry Meadows in the novel. There's something crazy, evil, and uncontrollable about them. Quint's speech recounting his survival drifting in the ocean after the sinking of the Indianapolis during World War II, and sharks killing and eating hundreds of men is genuinely horrifying and unsettling. An audience member walks away from the movie Jaws convinced that great whites, and sharks in general, are cold-blooded, unthinking monsters that lust for killing humans. The undisputable message of Jaws is that killing sharks saves lives. Human lives, and more importantly, doggy lives. As we all know, the film performed absurdly well, but a little known and often overlooked fact is how much was spent by the studio to create what they called a Jaws consciousness. I talked to Dr. Christopher L. Pepin-Neff, social scientist, shark researcher, and expert, and author of Flaws, Shark Bites, and Emotional Policymaking.
When Jaws was first done, there was a marketing team, and they spent $1 million which was a lot of money in the 1970s, on the marketing for Jaws. And the theme was to create a Jaws consciousness. So they ran these ads on radio that said, you know, what lurks beneath is the devilfish, and but they were specifically trying to develop a Jaws consciousness about public understanding of sharks, and that was the core of the marketing campaign.
The goal of Jaws was to make the public scared of sharks, as a marketing ploy to get people to watch the movie, plain and simple. And in doing so, the people involved perpetuated many negative and fear-mongering myths about sharks that still persist to this day. The myth of the rogue shark, foremost among them. The idea that individual sharks can go rogue and are not only responsible for strings of shark attacks, but that there are sharks that have actively gone about targeting humans. The 20th century changed a lot of our perception of sharks. The modern idea of the shark attack is, at least in the West, a relatively new phenomenon. Prior to the early 1900s, in newspapers, there were shark accidents, or shark incidents, or shark bites, not shark attacks, regardless of if such encounters were fatal or only a flesh wound. Shark attacks were considered just another beach accident like drowning or riptides or cramps. There was no assignment of blame to the animal. The first instance of the term rogue shark occurs in 1899 in Port Said, Egypt, around the relatively recently constructed Suez Canal. 3 cases of shark bite occurred in the same general area on the same day. The medical examiner concluded with little supporting evidence that, oh well, it must have been the same shark. The idea of rogue man-eaters lurking around in coastal waters was further solidified in 1916, when the public was convinced that several attacks were also the work of a single rogue shark. Public sentiment turned by the 1930s to the idea that shark attacks, as they would now be overwhelmingly called, are the fault of sharks that have acquired a taste for human blood, and in the case of the 1916 incident, these sharks must be eradicated just as Bruce was. Jaws, both the book and film's depiction of sharks, particularly the behavior of white sharks, has been met with great scrutiny by actual shark scientists and researchers.
Sharks are really boring. Which is and is not true. Like, sharks, if you've been on a shark boat and I've been on several, and you are trying to tag them, they'll swim around and ignore the chum, ignore the bait fish, ignore the seal, they're just swimming around having playing with jellyfish or kelp or something else, and they could care less about all of these fun things that you put in the water to sort of attract them to the surface so you can tag them. And even that is kind of interesting.
Contrary to Jaws' portrayal, sharks in truth are thinking animals. Some are more curious than others, some will investigate boats or a jellyfish, some might prefer to keep their distance. They might get pissed off if a human is harassing them, but generally they are calm animals that just want to chill and have a nice day. Most sharks only eat once or twice a week. Food and hunger are rarely on their minds. That's why humans and dolphins and all kinds of animals can casually interact with them. Any researcher that has actually spent time around sharks knows that they could care less about humans. The vast majority of time, sharks will just want to be left alone and will avoid humans as much as possible. It is the overwhelming opinion of almost all marine biologists that rogue sharks, or man-eaters, do not exist. The Jaws shark is nothing but a work of fiction. Sharks bite or attack humans on accident, and they do so incredibly rarely. You are more likely to die by having a vending machine fall on top of you, or a cow trample you, or a domesticated dog bite you around the throat, than a shark attack you. They are no more violent or dangerous or aggressive than any other predatory species. And yet, we as a society often single them out. All shark attacks are accidental. Cases of mistaken identity, confusion, or just plain curiosity on the shark's part, plain and simple. You, a strange-looking bipedal monkey on a piece of driftwood, are going into its ecosystem, and just like with any animal, they will react to this new, unfamiliar thing. Most of the time, they will do so by just running away. Sharks are not serial killers, everybody. They don't want to eat you. Humans are not part of the diet of any shark species. Trust me, we've got too much bone and too little fat for their tastes. In truth, most sharks have a cosmopolitan diet, consisting primarily of fish, squid, marine mammals, turtles, and seabirds. Fun fact, we found some really weird stuff in the stomachs of tiger sharks, like porcupines, antelopes, rats, dogs, cats, and horses, all most likely corpses from the land that were washed out to sea, in addition to trash. In any case, we should treat shark attacks in the ocean like, well, anything else. It's just like if I decide to walk through an African savanna or a jungle in India, or go for a hike in America. I shouldn't be surprised that there's always a possibility, a rare possibility, wild animals will react to my presence differently. But it's definitely no fault of the animal. With those few serial shark attacks claimed to be the work of a single rogue shark, we know that other non-shark related factors are often at play. In the famous 1916 incident that inspired Jaws, there was a deadly summer heat wave and polio epidemic in the United States that drove thousands of people to the beaches along Jersey Shore, making shark bites and attacks more common than they would be typically. In 1899, the Suez Canal was gaining a lot of traffic in Port Said, and it seems likely construction, shipping, and trade waste and noise might have attracted sharks to the surrounding harbor and beaches, again making shark-human contact more common. The rare increase in shark attacks typically correlates with something humans are doing more than what the sharks are doing. Sydney Harbor, for instance, is notorious for its insane kilometers-long sewage waste output, which attracts small fish called mullet. A group of about 60 bull sharks, all of them tagged and recorded now, travel up and down the river following the mullet because they're easy to catch and provide them with a reliable food source. Humans are inadvertently attracting these sharks to high population areas, and it really has nothing to do with anything on the shark's part. These are all likely cases of mistaken identity and accidents rather than anything of malintent, like the shark Bruce seems to do. A real Jaws scenario simply doesn't exist, and if it did, shark attacks off of Amity would likely have other, non-shark related causes, because rogue sharks are a work of fiction, plain and simple. And yet, shark myths still linger in our public discourse, and fiction can have. Jaws not only perpetuated these pre-existing, long-disproved stereotypes, but expanded them to an even larger market, cementing these tropes in the minds of millions for decades to come. My parents tell me they remember being afraid of going into the water after seeing Jaws. They were terrified of not just white sharks, of which Bruce was a member of, but all sharks because of it. And we know that audiences around the globe had this same feeling. Sharks were no longer just predatory animals, but monsters.
Carcharodon carcharius. Common names: White Death, Man-Eater.
And the film's influence on popular culture has been long-lasting, even in the most subtle of ways. Sharks in kids' movies like Finding Nemo are overwhelmingly portrayed as villains.
Fish are friends, not food.
The white shark Bruce, an explicit reference to Jaws itself, is depicted in the same light as a recovering alcoholic or drug addict. His thirst for blood overwhelms him to the point he can't help but be possessed with murderous intent, even towards his own friends. And it's funny, but a negative and false image to portray about a real animal. Perhaps the most notable effect Jaws has had is that of Shark Week. When I spoke to various shark scientists and experts, I was surprised to find how many of them hold disdain towards Discovery Channel's yearly TV program Shark Week. Although early on the program sought to educate the average viewer on shark facts, it has become clear that just like Jaws, it prolongs these same tropes and myths. Everything from the threatening and intimidating deep-voiced narrators
Great white invasion.
to the dark filters with bloody, gory, dramatic reenactments. The tone in these documentaries are overwhelmingly negative. Whatever actual information is given, sharks are scary animals, despite the very real evidence showing they are no more scary than any other predators in nature. Even the language given in these documentaries is coded in a way to make the audience feel threatened and intimidated by sharks, rather than informing the audience.
Shark Week has done a great disservice to sharks. I mean, if you want to, if it weren't for Shark Week, the Jaws shark might have passed. Conservation might have taken over.
Right.
And shark education might have taken over if it wasn't for Shark Week. Shark Week has done as much damage as Jaws ever did because it spent 25 years perpetuating the Jaws myth.
Here's just a few of the show titles from 2019 Shark Week: The Sharks of Headstone Hell, Laws of Jaws, Dangerous Waters, Capsized, Blood in the Water, Great White Kill Zone, Guadalupe, Monster Mako, Perfect Predator, Isle of Jaws, Blood Brothers. We've made sharks into killers, at least in our movies and TV shows. There is essentially an entire market of business in demonizing sharks to attract viewers, because the fake news Jaws shark sells. And as silly and harmless as Shark Week or Nemo seem, they permeate society with these inaccuracies and myths, and these have real-world effects on policy and conservation. The decisions of big politicians hinge on the very limited knowledge of sharks they see in movies and media. In 1967, the very first shark fishery in the United States was formed in New Jersey, due to concern that sharks would bite beachgoers. This started a general mindset that sharks are harmful to human safety and should be thinned out. Then Jaws comes around in 1974 and 1975 and stirs up this whole public consciousness, only further inflaming fear and anger towards shark populations. In the fallout of Jaws, the federal government, through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, issues a proclamation stating sharks are what they deem waste fish, which essentially allows open commercial fishing on all sharks. In the 1980s, shark derbies, sporting events where fishers throw blood and chum in the water and just catch as many or the largest sharks they can, arose. Startlingly similar to what you see in Jaws, except this time the evil shark they're looking for simply doesn't exist. Frank Mundus, that inspiration for the original novel, was among these hundreds of fishermen that participated in the eradication of waste fish. And it isn't just white sharks like Bruce in the films, but all sharks. Bull, tiger, thrasher, hammerheads, makos, nurse sharks, blacktips, you name it, and they were hunted and killed en masse through this process called shark culling, mostly in waters around the United States and Australia. Sharks caught by fisheries on accident, most notably the grey nurse shark around Australia, were killed anyway, with the belief, oh well, serves you right. And we'll get to finning or shark consumption, don't you worry. In essence, as an almost direct result of Jaws, and the Jaws consciousness it created, there were no protections for shark species. Like with many marine fish species, there were no limits on how many you could catch, which species you could catch, where you can catch, how that would impact the ecosystem as a whole. Commercial fisheries were essentially given free rein to fish, kill, and sell whatever they wanted and as much as they wanted with very few government regulations. This practice continued for over a decade and persists even to this day. It was only by the mid-90s that scientists were the first to see something was very wrong. An empty sea and a tamed ocean. Records of marine fish populations are scant, and they only start to become reliable after the 1950s, the data almost always coming from the catch nets of commercial fisheries. The thing is, nobody was even bothering to count or keep track of how healthy any fish species were, sharks most of all. The megamouth shark, one of the largest shark species out there, was only officially discovered in 1976, a year after Jaws, by complete accident by the American Navy. Part of the problem was that there were no researchers to record them. Prior to the 2000s, shark scientists or researchers didn't exist. The conservation community was made up of photographers, divers, and shark enthusiasts, with all due respect, amateurs. There were no professionals, no scientists. There was no funding, no investment in learning about these animals. And this, although much better than it was, is still a big problem today in 2020.
The number of shark researchers today in 2020 is probably 250. And
Whoa.
that is a major overestimation. Like, it could be as few as... I'm including every PhD student, every intern, along with every real scientist, and you probably get to 250.
Wow.
And it's just a minuscule number that can be for which there are resources to fund this kind of research.
And this wasn't just sharks, but all marine animals from corals, to whales, to stingrays, to jellyfish. There's so much about the ocean we still don't know, and yet we've been drastically impacting countless species as we enter the Anthropocene through human activity such as overfishing and climate change. We have just fished, and fished, and fished. Even with insufficient records, it is the unanimous opinion from all researchers that all the data coming through to us now is troubling. And the lack of data prior to 1950 should not be used as an excuse to ignore the current problems, as I know people will try. If anything, older data would only show the larger scale of our current predicament. Bear with me, but I'm going to get into the bad news. We know that shark populations have taken a beating over the past 50 years. Almost all the species around the world are in decline. Marine fish capture has increased at an exponential rate over the past half-century. In 2020, when compared to past decades, we know that the amount of fish per unit of effort has been decreasing sharply. That is to say, it is taking more and more effort to catch the same amount of fish year after year. Human consumption of marine fish is so high that the wild fisheries are leveling off because they're reaching the breaking point where wild fish populations aren't able to sustain human consumption. It's been getting so bad that aquaculture, farm-raised fish food stock, is the fastest growing food sector to make up for the slack. This consumption is primarily what is driving marine ecosystems into decline and collapse. We know this. The research and measurements only confirm what fishers around the world have long since observed and suspected. The statistics, measurements, and data don't lie. Sharks are disappearing. Around Australia, between 1963 and 1998, fisheries have seen a decline in 78% of hammerheads, 47% for whalers, and a shocking 92% for white sharks. Large predatory sharks and fish are shown to be primarily vulnerable to human activity, with 90% of them being removed from ecosystems around the globe. Studies indicate that only 1/3 of all 1,041 species of cartilaginous fish, sharks, rays, chimeras, are considered safe. The other 652 species are either threatened, endangered, or critically endangered by human overfishing. It is generally agreed that the year 1991 was the low point for sharks worldwide due to the efforts during the 1980s to remove them altogether, and many of the marine experts I've talked to are surprised that they have survived as they have to this day. By conservative estimates, 158 fish species have become extinct since 1900, probably more. No doubt there are several species and subspecies that became extinct before scientists were able to record them properly. Fisheries in the North Atlantic will tell you of the great Newfoundland cod collapse, where centuries of overfishing and mismanagement caused spawning biomass to decrease by at least 75% in all stocks, by 90% in 3 of the 6 stocks, and by 99% in the case of the northern cod, previously the largest cod fishery in the world. The entire industry collapsing on itself, as the cod just seemed to disappear into thin air. Decades later, the cod still haven't returned. One of the more unsettling findings is to learn that not only are fish populations getting smaller, but the fish themselves are shrinking. Fish species are on average declining in size. From tiger sharks to swordfish to salmon to tilapia, the data is all there, worldwide and recorded by independent researchers. The oceans used to be filled with tons of giant, legendary-sized fish, whereas scientists call them aquatic megafauna, until the 1950s. Sperm whale pods, dozens if not hundreds strong, salmon regularly reaching the size of children. But something changed when humans began intensifying their fishing practices and disrupting the balance so that aquatic megafauna like jaws are rarities or extinct. These great leviathans are all gone now. We ate them, or we ate their food. We killed them before they can reach the age that brings with them such size. The problem is that removing one part of the ecosystem, like apex predators, can have serious ramifications lower down the food chain. The whole ocean is essentially one massive balancing act between species trying to survive, and humans are pushing this balance to its limit. Our oceans are becoming empty, or at least tamed, like the once Great Plains of North America or the woodlands of Europe. And I think we shouldn't waste time debating if this is really occurring, because we know it is. Not just scientists, but corporations, local fishermen, and the consumers have all felt it. Why and how is all this happening? So what? Populations are in decline. What am I supposed to do about it? How do we even know humans are responsible for this? Well, from studies we've found that the biggest problem facing sharks today is not actually finning or the demand for shark consumption, though it is a close second. It is actually bycatch. When sharks, fish, turtles, dolphins, and just about everything else in the ocean gets dragged into commercial fisheries nets on accident and dies along with commercial fish like salmon, tuna, cod, etc. This is notably a large concern with whale sharks in Southeast Asia. Fishing not targeting sharks is just as complicit in their decline and endangerment as finning for increased demand in shark-fed soup in China. A lot of the problems primarily stem from mismanagement and unsustainable practices by fisheries around the globe. Fisheries and government policies for the most part haven't been looking at lifespans or life cycles of the fish they're capturing. Look at the case of the orange ruffy, a deep water fish prized for its meat. Schools of these animals were caught by the thousands and served on platters in restaurants from England to Japan in the late 1970s. Within a few years, the stocks became severely depleted. We had thought the fish only lived for 30 years, but little did we know that the orange ruffy being caught in actuality had lived for over 200 years, some closer to 300. Later studies confirmed that when these fish were first hatched, Napoleon was still alive. As it turns out, orange ruffy grow extremely slowly relative to other fish and even humans, only reaching sexual maturity between 23 and 40 years old. The fish simply cannot recover at the rate humans are catching them, but they're still being caught to this day. Great white sharks, such as Bruce, have been experiencing a similar situation. White sharks are very mysterious, mainly because they're so elusive to us. It was believed, just like with the ruffies, they reach sexual maturity around 15 and only live for around 30 years. but sure enough, subsequent studies have shown that they don't mature until their 20s and 30s. The sharks in truth live about as long as people do, into their 70s, if not longer. But again, we still don't have all the data.
There is still zero scientist that has ever found a breeding spot for sharks. Never.
Huh.
They've never done it. So not only do they breed at a very late level and have these high maturation points, they also, we know absolutely nothing about their breeding.
Recent studies have shown that adult white sharks are an increasingly rare sight to see in our oceans. Fewer and fewer of these sharks are living to maturity, and their slow aging makes them more vulnerable when compared to other shark species. Out of a decades-long study, in contrast to other sharks caught, most white sharks were juveniles and subadults, and very few, less than 1% of females and 7% of males, were of mature size. This is dangerous as it is showing a similar problem to the orange roughies, where reproductively capable whites are becoming harder and harder to find. In reality, massive-sized 60, 70, 80-year-old white sharks like Bruce are a truly extraordinarily rare occurrence for us to see in our modern Anthropocene waters. Today, in 2020, there are probably only a handful of whites larger than 17 feet long, like the massive female known as Deep Blue, 20 feet, or Lucy, 17 feet, or Luna, 15 feet. All of them are likely grandmas in their 60s or 70s, and have the battle scars to prove it. And this rarity is because humans have made it incredibly difficult for white sharks to survive to such an age and size. If Bruce were real, he, or should I say she, would be a marvel, a 1 in a million shot. This black marlin caught and killed in 2018 took a human lifetime to get to this size, and had to avoid not only its natural predators, but to find food in its depleted feeding grounds, escape bycatch through commercial fishing, and also game fishers deliberately trying to catch her. Decades worth of that. And for what? The fishers can't eat the meat because the marlin's high mercury levels. All of that for a picture and a bit of sport. Conclusion, a glint of hope. The story behind Jaws is a sad one. Peter Benchley would later regret writing Jaws. In the wake of his success, he saw that his novel and film had resulted in the demonization and subsequent slaughter of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of sharks. He attempted to make amends for what he had done, becoming an adherent advocate for their conservation. Frank Mundus, the living, breathing Quint, the shark killer, eventually felt the same way. He spent the latter part of his life before his heart attack in 2008 promoting catch and release fishing and helping conserve and protect these monster fish that got him so famous in the first place. Since 1991, efforts have been made to preserve, protect, and heal from the damage caused by the previous century. In 1994, the gray nurse shark became the first shark to be protected in the world. It would be followed by other species, notably great whites. Laws and other pieces of legislation protecting sharks have since been made. The Shark Finning Prohibition Act and Shark Conservation Act, as well as fisheries management plans, have all been shown to work. White shark populations have been steadily recovering from the low point in 1991. There are more sharks in the ocean now than there were in the 1990s. But that doesn't mean they are safe. These fish are still threatened by bycatch and finning around the world. White sharks are notoriously difficult to protect because they travel so much, thousands of miles, ending up under different jurisdictions and protections, if any, depending on the region. And some current laws and regulations might not be enough to protect them. They need more teeth. Archaeological data shows that humans have been deep-sea fishing and relying on the oceans for survival for thousands of years, and it seems for the most part we've found ways in the past to make the practice sustainable. Solutions for the current problems facing marine ecosystems will be complicated and difficult, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't try. I think we as a planet need to recognize that the oceans are not endless. It can recover sometimes, but it also can be pushed to the point of no recovery whatsoever. It is delicate, and bringing back great leviathans like Bruce, or the Newfoundland cod, or just preserving them right now, will take a multi-coordinated effort among scientists, politicians, businesses, and local peoples. One of the most important things I think we need to recognize is that we humans need to consume less. Only reason there is so much fishing in the first place is because it's profitable. We create the demand. I believe we need to tone things down, stop expanding, and start finding more sustainable methods because the current ones are simply not realistic. Best course of action is to regulate our consumption as consumers. It shouldn't solely be on the individual level, but something international government and trade organizations should start to gravitate towards. Stop eating shark fin soup and other shark products, or at least decrease the demand for them. I'm looking at you, China. And in the West, we should try to consume less as well. Less marine seafood like salmon, cod, tuna, etc. to avoid bycatch. Legislation works and it is necessary to keep, if not create, more protections for fish and marine animals, better limits for catch numbers, and stronger penalties for offenders. Scientists need funding to learn more about sharks and other aspects of the ocean. We should get the full picture, life cycles, recovery times, lifespans, before we decide to fish or kill a species. Most of all, we should end the demonization and persecution of sharks, the perpetuation of myths and misinformation. Shark Week and Jaws suck for shark depictions, and we should recognize this and strive to give these animals a less negative image. And if you want to donate or get involved in conservation, here's a few shark conservation programs suggested by shark experts if you feel so inclined. The extinction of fish, reptiles, and amphibians is largely unnoticed next to mammals and birds. They're not charismatic or cuddly, and therefore they haven't gotten much of the public's interest. But nonetheless, they are just as important and valuable to the Earth's health and continued survival. If we want to be able to swim alongside or meet the beautiful and legendary creatures that once danced in the depths, and see those oceans as healthy and plentiful as they used to be, we must take a second to learn about them. Not from the movie screens, but from the sea itself. Alright, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day and learn something new. Alright, bye. Feel free to watch more of my Trade the Explainer videos, and I'll see you next time. Farewell and adieu to you fair Spanish ladies. Farewell and adieu to you ladies of Spain.